Don't skip this if you've ever felt pressure to upgrade your car, your watch, or your apartment just to look like you've made it. There's a man named Jake who shows up to every networking event in the same navy blazer he bought 7 years ago. Slightly worn at the elbows, nothing remarkable. His business card is plain white stock, no embossing, no gold lettering. He drives 40 minutes to these events in a 2013 Toyota Camry with 140,000 miles on the odometer. The other attendees, the ones in tailored suits and fresh haircuts, handing out thick linen cards with their titles printed in raised ink. They've mentally categorized Jake before he opens his mouth. Probably middle management, maybe a consultant struggling to find clients. Definitely not someone worth spending the whole evening talking to. Jake sold his first company for $11 million when he was 34. He's building his second one now. He has no mortgage, no car payments, no debt of any kind. His brokerage account has more zeros than most of these people will see in 3 lifetimes combined, and he has absolutely no interest in correcting anyone's assumption. Stay with this until the end, because the negotiation advantage alone is worth more than anything I could tell you in the first 2 minutes. This isn't a story about humility as a virtue. This isn't about being modest for modesty's sake. This is about something far more strategic, far more calculated, and far more financially powerful than most people ever figure out. Looking poor might be the single greatest wealth-building strategy available to you right now. The data behind this is not subtle. The Millionaire Next Door, one of the most comprehensive studies ever conducted on American wealth, followed real millionaires across the country for decades. What researchers Thomas Stanley and William Danko found destroyed every cultural assumption about what wealthy people look like. The median price millionaires pay for a car is $31,367, not $80,000, not $120,000, $31,000, a Honda, a Toyota, a Ford, standard vehicles that disappear in any suburban parking lot in America. Meanwhile, an Experian automotive study found that 61% of people earning over $250,000 drive Hondas, Toyotas, or Fords, not German luxury brands, not Italian sports cars, regular cars with regular insurance premiums and regular maintenance costs. Now flip that. 8% of people earning under $100,000 own luxury vehicles. They're spending $70,000 on cars while making $55,000 a year. They look wealthy, they are not wealthy. They are performing wealth while destroying the actual possibility of it. One group has the appearance, the other group has the money. These are almost never the same people. The psychology driving this split goes back over a century. Sociologist Thorstein Veblen coined the term conspicuous consumption in 1899, and his central observation was so accurate it has only become more relevant with time. People don't buy expensive things purely for utility. They buy signals, they buy the story those objects tell about them. A $45,000 watch tells time with the same accuracy as a $45 watch. The extra $44,955 buys one thing only, the ability to communicate status to strangers who will forget you by Tuesday. Research consistently shows that people who view money as a symbol of power and social standing report lower financial satisfaction than those who view money as a tool for security and freedom. They spend to impress, they don't monitor, they don't plan, and they end up asset poor inside the appearance of being asset rich. The compounding math on this is merciless. Consider two people, both earn $180,000 a year. Person A, the performer, spends aggressively on visible consumption, luxury car lease at $1,200 a month, designer wardrobe refreshed annually, upscale apartment in a neighborhood where his neighbors have expensive taste and expect him to match it. He invests maybe 5% of his income, that's $9,000 a year, going to work for him. Person B is Jake. Jake drives the Camry. Jake buys quality clothes that last instead of status clothes that signal. Jake lives in a neighborhood where nobody cares what's in his garage. He invests 30% of his income. That's $54,000 a year, compounding at 7% average annual returns. After 25 years, the performer has approximately $600,000 in investable assets. That's not nothing, but it's fragile. One bad year, one medical emergency, one industry disruption, and that cushion evaporates fast. After 25 years, Jake has approximately $3.6 million. Same income, same time horizon. The difference between them isn't intelligence or luck or opportunity. It's a series of daily choices about what to show and what to build. If that math just hit you differently, it should. Drop a comment below. Are you building wealth quietly, or have you been paying the status tax without realizing it? I read every single one. The visible wealthy person paid what economists call a status tax on every major purchase across those 25 years. The invisible wealthy person collected a status rebate. Every dollar not spent on appearances went to work compounding in the background. That gap, $3 million, is the real price of looking wealthy. The fraud and crime implications of visible wealth add another dimension that most financially comfortable people never consider until it's too late. Javelin research found that cybercriminals targeted 6.4% of the general population for identity theft in a recent study period. That number jumps to 8.1% for high net worth individuals with assets over $1 million. Affluent Americans are 43% more likely to experience identity theft than average citizens, according to a joint study by Experian and the Department of Justice. The more visibly wealthy you appear, the larger the target on your financial life. Security experts have a term for sophisticated attacks on wealthy individuals: whaling. Unlike mass phishing scams that cast wide nets hoping for any bite, whaling operations are meticulously constructed. Attackers compile profiles using social media, data breaches, public records, and open-source intelligence. They impersonate private bankers, trusted advisors, estate attorneys, or even family members. They know your lifestyle, they know your habits, they know what you own because you showed them. The Federal Trade Commission reported that Americans lost $10.3 billion to fraud in 2023. Investment fraud alone accounted for $4.6 billion of those losses, with sophisticated schemes disproportionately targeting people who broadcast their financial success. Jake, in his old Blazer and his unremarkable Camry, is essentially invisible to these operations. There's nothing in his appearance that signals he's worth the effort. The guy in the $150,000 car with the Rolex visible from across the room has already told everyone in range exactly what they need to know to start building a case against him. If you didn't know wealthy people are 43% more likely to be targeted for identity theft, this channel is exactly where you need to be. Subscribe. This is the kind of data most finance channels skip entirely. Invisibility isn't just a financial strategy, it's a security strategy. The social dynamics shift in ways that take years to fully appreciate. When you drive a luxury car, people assume you can absorb expensive dinners. When you wear designer clothes, colleagues expect you to pick up tabs. When you live in an affluent neighborhood, you inherit the baseline spending expectations of everyone around you. The neighborhood doesn't just cost you in mortgage payments, it costs you in the invisible social pressure to maintain a standard of consumption that matches your zip code. Research on social comparison theory shows that status is purely relational. It has no absolute value, it only exists in relation to what others around you have and display. In high inequality environments, status signaling becomes more aggressive, not less. The distance between tiers widens, comparison intensifies, and the cost of maintaining your position in the hierarchy inflates every year. Jake opted out of this hierarchy entirely. He maintains access to relationships across economic brackets because nobody looks at him and calculates a tier. Nobody resents him. Nobody asks him to subsidize their lifestyle. Nobody expects him to compete. This social invisibility provides something genuinely rare for wealthy people, relationships based entirely on who he is rather than what he has. Research on high net worth psychology documents a phenomenon that sounds like a paradox until you understand the mechanism. Wealthy people frequently report a paradox of increased power paired with decreased trust. They can never be entirely certain whether someone values them as a person or values proximity to their resources. The uncertainty corrodes friendships, complicates romantic relationships, and makes every new social interaction carry a subtle interrogation. Is this person here for me or for what they think I can do for them? Jake's friends have known him for years, most of them with no idea of his actual financial position. Those friendships were never filtered through the lens of what he's worth. They're among the most authentic relationships he has. The framework from the Millionaire Next Door created two categories that have nothing to do with income and everything to do with behavior: PAWs, prodigious accumulators of wealth, and UAWs, underaccumulators of wealth. A school teacher earning $60,000 a year can be more of a POW than a surgeon earning $600,000. Income is just the raw material. What you do with it determines the category. The formula is straightforward. Multiply your age by your pre-tax annual household income, then divide by 10. A 45-year-old earning $120,000 should have approximately $540,000 in net worth if they're performing at the PAW level. Significantly below that threshold and you're likely a UAW, converting income into appearances rather than assets. Run the PAW formula on yourself right now. Age times income divided by 10. Where do you land? Drop your result in the comments. Not the number, just PAW or UAW. Let's see where this audience actually stands. UAWs are often highly educated. They're professionals in demanding fields. They intellectually understand compound interest and delayed gratification. They just don't practice either because the social environment they've chosen makes visible consumption feel mandatory rather than optional. Stanley and Danko called certain spending decisions million-dollar choices. Purchases that, had they not been made, would have resulted in over $1 million additional dollars in net worth by retirement. The number is designed to be jarring, and it should be. The difference between a $35,000 car and a $90,000 car invested instead at 7% annual returns over 25 years is roughly $290,000. That's the real sticker price on the luxury vehicle. The number on the window is just the down payment on the actual cost. Jake knows the actual cost of everything he doesn't buy. The cultural programming that makes visible consumption feel necessary starts early and reinforces constantly. Stanley and Danko observed that young people are socialized to believe that people who have money spend lavishly and that if you don't display success, you haven't achieved it. This message comes from every direction simultaneously: television, social media, advertising, peer groups, family expectations, the neighborhood you grow up in. The implicit message is consistent. Rich people look rich. If you want to be taken seriously, if you want people to know you've made something of yourself, you have to show it. Through your car, through your clothes, through your address, through your watch, through your vacations photographed at resorts and posted with location tags that tell everyone exactly how you're doing. This belief is not just false, it actively works against the outcome it claims to support. Someone who internalizes this narrative will spend their entire productive career maintaining an expensive appearance of success while systematically preventing the actual accumulation of it. They'll arrive at 60 with a wardrobe worth $80,000 and a retirement account that cannot sustain a decade of basic living. The person who rejects this narrative, quietly, without announcing the rejection, without making it a personality or an identity, builds wealth in the background while the performers are busy managing their display. Jake doesn't tell people he invests aggressively. He doesn't explain his philosophy at networking events. He just wears the same navy blazer and drives home in the Camry and deposits the difference into accounts that nobody can see. This next part is where most people finally connect the dots. Don't stop watching now. The psychological section coming up explains why even people who know all this still can't stop spending on status. The negotiating advantages of invisible wealth compound across every financial interaction over a lifetime. A car dealer calibrates their approach within the first 90 seconds of meeting a customer. They've been trained to read signals, what you're wearing, what you drove to the lot, how you carry yourself. Someone who arrives in a luxury vehicle and expensive clothes has already communicated that they value status, that they're emotionally invested in the upgrade, and that they have demonstrated capacity to spend. The dealer's strategy adjusts accordingly. Jake arrives in the Camry. He's treated as someone who needs convincing, someone who might walk away, someone who isn't a guaranteed sale. He negotiates from a position that looks like weakness and is actually strength. Warren Buffett, worth nearly $150 billion, lives in the same house in Omaha he bought in 1958 for $31,500. He has noted that nobody treats him like he needs to be managed financially because nothing about his appearance suggests it. His modesty isn't a performance of humility. It's a strategic posture that has served him across decades of negotiation and relationship building. Contractors, service providers, lawyers, accountants, they all calibrate pricing based on perceived ability and willingness to pay. Looking wealthy invites premium pricing across every category. Looking ordinary receives ordinary pricing. Over the course of a lifetime, this pricing differential accumulates into hundreds of thousands of dollars, a hidden wealth tax paid continuously by everyone who signals affluence. The employment and professional dynamics deserve specific attention because they're counterintuitive in a way most people resist. When colleagues perceive you as financially comfortable, the relationship subtly changes. Bosses question how motivated you are. Teammates wonder why you're still showing up if you've already made it. Clients suspect your fees are inflated because they've seen your watch. The moment visible wealth enters a professional relationship, it introduces frictions that invisible wealth never generates. The quietly wealthy employee holds a position of extraordinary power that almost nobody else has access to. They have the psychological security of knowing they don't need the job, combined with the professional appearance of someone who very much does. They can take risks that anxious employees cannot take. They can decline projects that conflict with their values. They can negotiate compensation from genuine strength while appearing to negotiate from genuine need. This is not manipulation, it's strategy. The goal isn't to deceive, it's to maintain the option to leave, the freedom to choose, without those options being priced against you before you can use them. The family dynamics created by invisible wealth versus visible wealth produce dramatically different outcomes across generations. Stanley and Danko found a negative correlation between receiving financial transfers from parents and accumulating independent wealth as adult children. The more affluent parents gave to their adult children, the less those children built on their own. This seems counterintuitive until you understand the mechanism. Children who grow up knowing there's a safety net, knowing that money exists and will be provided, develop subtly different risk and effort calibrations than children who believe they're building from scratch. The knowledge of available resources changes behavior in ways that ultimately limit the wealth the next generation can build for themselves. Parents who display wealth raise children who expect it. Parents who live modestly while quietly wealthy raise children who build it. Jake's kids don't know what he's worth. They've watched him drive a practical car and buy practical things and make deliberate choices for their entire childhoods. When they're older and they learn the actual numbers, that lesson will already be embedded. The habits that built wealth will have been modeled for them before they even understood what wealth was. The psychological dimension is where the most underappreciated advantages of invisible wealth accumulate. Hedonic adaptation is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. Increases in income or wealth produce temporary spikes in satisfaction, but baseline levels return to roughly their previous position within months. The new car is extraordinary for 6 weeks, and then it's just the car. The luxury apartment is thrilling for a season, and then it's just home. Every status purchase delivers diminishing emotional returns while permanently extracting financial capital. Invisible wealth produces a different psychological profile entirely. The growing net worth doesn't create visible milestones to adapt to. What it creates instead is a persistent background sense of security that never fully adapts away. The knowledge that any emergency is manageable. The knowledge that walking away from a bad situation is an option rather than an impossibility. The knowledge that the future is structurally protected regardless of what the next year brings. This background security influences everything. Decisions become less fear-driven. Risk tolerance increases where it should. In investments, in career moves, in entrepreneurial bets. Relationships become less transactional. Sleep becomes less frequently interrupted by financial anxiety at 3 in the morning. The visible wealthy person lives on a treadmill that never stops. Every year demands new signals of continued success. The watch that impressed last year is unremarkable this year. The car that turned heads 3 years ago no longer communicates what it once did. The entire system requires constant investment just to maintain its position. And the investment only buys maintenance of an appearance rather than growth of an asset. Jake stepped off that treadmill before he ever got on it. His identity isn't constructed from what he consumes. His confidence doesn't depend on what anyone thinks of his possessions. He has no display to maintain, no hierarchy to compete in, no status to defend. The gap between these two approaches widens every single year. Consider the full arc. 2 people, same starting point, same income, same intelligence, same access to information. One builds for appearance, one builds for freedom. At 35, the gap is noticeable but not dramatic. At 45, it's significant. At 55, it's the difference between having options and not having them. At 65, it's the difference between a retirement that is funded and a retirement that is deferred indefinitely. The visible spender at 65 has stories, beautiful stories, restaurants they experienced, resorts where they made memories, cars they loved driving, items they treasured. The invisible wealthy person at 65 has options, the ability to work if they choose it and stop if they don't, the ability to travel on their own terms rather than on a credit card that accrues interest, the ability to help their children and their grandchildren from a position of genuine abundance rather than performed generosity. Both made choices at every fork in the road. One set of choices produced memories, the other produced freedom. The cultural tide has been shifting slowly but measurably. Bain & Company's 2024 luxury report found that affluent consumers are increasingly moving toward what the industry calls quiet luxury, products defined by quality and craft rather than visible branding. A 2024 Accenture survey found that 52% of global shoppers now prefer content that showcases practical quality over aspirational excess. The era of logo-forward status signaling is contracting, not because people have become less interested in status, but because a new, more sophisticated status signal has emerged. The person who doesn't need you to know. The fact that stealth wealth is now its own status signal tells you everything about where this culture is heading. If you want to understand that shift before everyone else does, this channel is where that conversation is happening. Subscribe. Stealth wealth has become its own form of social currency. The unmarked cashmere. The car that cost nothing to own and everything to understand. The watch that experts recognize and bystanders ignore. The house in the neighborhood nobody Googles. These are signals for an increasingly small audience, and they communicate something that a Bentley never could. I am so far past the need to impress you that the thought never crossed my mind. Jake understands this fluently. He's never tried to look poor exactly. He's just never been willing to pay the price of looking rich. And the savings from that single, lifelong decision have compounded into something most of the tailored suit crowd in that networking room can't imagine from inside their monthly lease payments. There's a specific kind of freedom that only becomes visible from the inside. It's the freedom of the person who gets a difficult phone call from their boss and feels nothing but calm because they could leave tomorrow if they needed to. It's the freedom of the person who looks at an unexpected medical bill and sees a problem to be solved rather than a crisis to be survived. It's the freedom of the person who makes financial decisions based on what they actually want, rather than what will look correct to an audience of people who weren't paying attention anyway. Jake drives home from the networking event in the Camry. The men in tailored suits are still inside, still performing, still calculating who in the room is worth their time based on the visible signals available. They'll go home tonight and make the payments that keep the performance running. They'll do it again tomorrow, and the year after, and the year after that. Jake merges onto the highway and turns up the radio. His net worth grew again today. Nobody at the event noticed. That's precisely the point. The old Blazer, the plain business card, the 2013 Camry with 140,000 miles. These aren't failures of ambition. They're the artifacts of a different ambition entirely. An ambition measured not in what others think you have, but in what you actually do. Not in status defended, but in options accumulated. Not in what you spend to look free, but in the freedom that spending less purchased. Every wealthy person who still drives a Toyota understood something that the performance crowd never figured out. Wealth isn't the signal. Wealth is what you keep when you stop paying for the signal. Jake's net worth grew again today. Nobody at the event noticed. If you want to be that person, not the one performing, but the one compounding, like this video, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.